Thanks for that, Anish. It's great to be here. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. And so, very excited to be here at Fully Connected 2024. First time at Fully Connected, so yeah, let's get started, I suppose. So, as he mentioned, I'm going to be talking about how we're using GenAI in production in our C2C e-commerce marketplace. So, quick overview. Going to start off with an intro, and then kind of a little bit of marketing tie into our innovation bet on GenAI and how we get GenAI to production, the ROI of the GenAI so far, and then kind of a sneak peek into what's next. As I teased, it's the future of Japanese C2C e-commerce. And so, intro, what is Mercari? And so we are, again, Japan's largest C2C, so consumer-to-consumer marketplace. We started about 10 years ago. Now we have about 23 million monthly active users, which is, for scale, like 1 in 4 adults in Japan. So like a majority, if like probably all people who use e-commerce apps in Japan use Mercari. Total number of item listings, 3 billion. Gross merchandise value, which is basically the number, like the price of goods traded on our marketplace last fiscal year was about $6.5 billion. Net sales is 1.1. I mean, this is with that atrocious exchange rate. So these numbers are actually, again, still growing over time. And we started off as an e-commerce marketplace. We've since branched out to many more product areas. Maybe if anyone here is familiar with Mercari before coming to this talk, if you could raise your hand. Okay, cool. And was it Mercari US, maybe? Is it the US branch of Mercari? If you could keep your hand raised. Okay, a few people. So there's at least more than one person in the audience who knew that there was more than just the US marketplace. But we started in Japan. And so for the sake of this talk, I'm going to focus mainly on the work we're doing in our Japan side marketplace, which is still the largest part of our business to date. Also to mention that the other teams in these companies are doing great work themselves. I just can't speak to that today. And so why Mercari? It's just, C2C e-commerce, we all do that. eBay does that in America. What's different? Well, our user base is very different in Japan. So we started off as kind of more of a flea market treasure hunting experience. So people to this day still look to Mercari for like the joy of discovery, as we're calling it. We make it really easy, like 3 clicks to search, tap, buy, and then you just have things. And so people like to just spend time on Mercari just discovering what it has in store for the different categories. Also, a second chance for cherished belongings. The Japanese marketplace, people treasure their goods, but maybe don't always want to keep them around anymore. They've kind of served their useful purpose. And so Mercari is an outlet for them to trade those goods to people who will take care of them and not necessarily make a profit off of what they have in their house. And then, which leads us to the third point of community. So our Japanese community is actually very strong, and people will say, compared to other competing apps, that's the main competitive advantage of Mercari. Versus other marketplaces are very transactional. Ours is focused more on engagement and getting users talking to one another, and again, keeping that community vibrant. And so, to the point of this talk, LLMs at Mercari. So it started with, we've always used AI for many years now across different product areas at Mercari. So violation detection is one example. When LLMs first came out, like 2022, one of the teams in the customer support team decided to use LLMs to better help them solve customer inquiries. So we have 24/7 customer support. We have real people that are on call all the time. It's very difficult to route customers with certain inquiries to people with that expertise. And so we use LLMs to both pull up the right issue templates as well as route it to the right agents with the expertise. And this actually was really successful, which brought us to our innovation bet. So May of last year, we formed a dedicated team for GenAI to spread it all across the organization, which is actually really rare if anyone is familiar with Japanese businesses. This is kind of like, we're literally the only company doing this, at least at the time. And so how do we do this, right? Getting GenAI to production. It started off with, again, we formed this core LLM team responsible for like planning, model selection, prompt engineering, best practices, things like that. And so we have two main modes of operation. So that team will either lead projects themselves end to end, or they support one of these core teams. We call it a co-creation paradigm, where this core team has a use case and LLM team supports them in whatever way they can with the LLM parts of the project. And so I guess the first place to start off with is LLM-led projects, LLM team-led projects, because that's where we started in the business, so it makes sense to start there chronologically. Raise hands, has anybody, as their first usage of LLMs in enterprise, just deployed ChatGPT internally, right? So that's the easiest place to start generally. It's starting simple, and so for us, it wasn't as simple as saying, oh, just go to OpenAI and just use their UI directly. We built our own in-house to handle our Japanese colleagues and employees and also provide them easy ways of switching to whatever latest model was available at the time. We also have things like English to Japanese translation, code interpreter, image generation, all very typical things that you're probably already used to seeing, but the point we wanted to make was that we started something very simple and small that wasn't user-facing so that our LLM team could get expertise and get feedback, right? Build tools and processes to now scale LLM projects going forward, which they did with this next small extension where they just used RAG for our internal code base and our microservices docs. So how many people here have their documentation mostly in Slack? Okay, only a few, that's great. So unfortunately for us, or maybe fortunately, Slack is like a living document, all the best practices that are superseding what we have internally. All of our docs get stale really fast. It's all in Slack. So this actually solved a big pain point where you don't just ask it, oh, how do I create a new microservice like a Google search? It's more of how do we do this with our organization standards and tooling. So this was also successful, and it was a nice iterative step on what we had previously in a way that granted it much more robustness to different use cases that actually mattered to us. And so quick tie into weights and biases. They really helped us in this project as well. The engineer on this project, Yuki Yada, was saying that if it wasn't for weights and biases and being able to iterate on logs and really validate model outputs on edge cases, he wouldn't have been able to get this out quickly and then get buy-in to keep working on it. So thank you again, weights and biases, for that. And then bringing us to our next LLM-led project. This is something that now we've developed processes and mechanisms internally that we validated. Our weights and biases workflows, for instance. Now we wanted to serve something to customers. So we had something called Mercari AI Assist. And what it did at a high level, there were some trigger conditions where if a lister was a new lister, item hadn't sold for some set period of time, the bot would reach out to them with suggestions for title, description, all based off of previously purchased transactions that were similar to the items that the lister was listing. And then this is a nice guardrail that we had, so we didn't just give them access to an LLM conversation. We would just have pop up on their screen or an instant message, and it would give them options, and the user would click through to it. And you would say, okay, sure, maybe you can suggest to update the title, for instance. And then it would say, okay, great, this is what I would update it to. Do you want to apply it? Click yes, and then it's done. And this was really useful to prevent any issues with engaging with the LLM directly and to really make sure that this was a sandboxed experience, that we had a very well-defined user experience, which is especially important for our business at our scale. The problem was this had some trade-offs. So we were using just ChatGPT 3.5 under the hood, super expensive, even with those edge case trigger conditions I mentioned. Performance wasn't as good, especially considering context is different. It's Japanese text, e-commerce. People have different conversations here than they would on eBay in the US, for instance. And also there were some reliability concerns. Because of the fact we build this production feature on someone else's API, we never know what's going to happen, and so that wasn't something we were comfortable doing. So the answer was to fine-tune our own model. So if everyone mentions during the keynote when Lucas was talking about LoRa, it's a great way to fine-tune versus full parameter fine-tuning, full parameter fine-tuning. LoRa and QLoRa can make that much faster. with just as good performance, if not better, and also with reduced cost and inference speed. So this is what our engineer at the time did, and it worked out very well. So just some bit of background, if anyone's here for the technical details. We took a bunch of Japanese LLM models, and this was the one that was successful, was Swallow 7B, the instruction variant. And at a high level, this is the workflow, but what's really important is to notice the results, which is that with this fine-tuned model, performance, the blue score, qualitative performance was 1.3 times better, and it was 14 times cheaper, which I can't give exact numbers, but it was a really, really large number internally, which actually helped us a lot because now use case becomes much more broad, right? We don't have to have such strict trigger conditions because now this is much more scalable. It makes much more business sense. And given kind of our fine-tuning strategy, it actually opens up different use cases for us to take this model and now fine-tune it on maybe assisting buyers or assisting sellers in other contexts. And then same kind of feedback, that engineer for that project was saying, if it wasn't for weights and biases, we wouldn't have been able to find that product market fit and kind of find ways to improve this system and really add value to users. I don't know if everyone else here has the same constraints of quarterly based projects, right? You need to like deliver in the quarter with this impact. And so without weights and biases, we would have maybe not done this project at all because at the time it was very ill-defined and didn't have a lot of support. So there was no way we were going to go to management and say, let's fine-tune a model now today. They're going to say, no, that's crazy. But we showed them it actually is effective. And then we said, but it's expensive. We can do better. And then we showed them, and then they say, oh, cool. And then now it's in production. And so going back to how we get GenAI into production, as I mentioned earlier, our second paradigm is co-creation. So LLM team helps a core team. So I'll give some quick examples of that. Again, not too many given the time. So they've helped many other teams across the company. I'm focusing just now on search, just because it's an area near and dear to my heart. So the first area is synonym expansion. So this happens in the offline stage in batch. So this is great because for real-time search, LLMs in the mix is not scalable. It's not going to work, and it's going to be super expensive. But we can do things like apply them on offline problems. So a big problem in Japanese especially is our text-based search engine before any AI operations on our search results has some problems. So for instance, in this example, we see Louis Vuitton. In Japanese, this says Vuitton. Unfortunately, it's in Japanese. And so if you type in Louis Vuitton in English, the search engine won't know that, oh, this Vuitton in Japanese is the same thing. So there's a lot of classic techniques to do this. For years, we were doing this manually. It was really painful. There's like some 100 megabyte CSV that's like 10 years old at this point. And it doesn't catch all cases. We actually get like customer service requests that say, this shouldn't be in the search. And someone says, oh, that was like an album from an artist 4 years ago that maps to this thing. We can delete it now. It's crazy. So we wanted to improve on that a little bit and kind of keep our dictionary up to date automatically with LLMs. And so the idea is to say, okay, like Louis Vuitton, what are some other ways in Japanese that people would refer to this? Vuitton or Louis Vuitton, both in Japanese and maybe in English, Louis Vuitton. So now they all map to those same products. And so we went through a couple iterations. Final step is RAG. So we had some fine-tuned prompts, and then we also had some, I guess, edge case validation in that prompt afterwards. The problem was, even after that, domain-specific synonyms were always missed. So for instance, pouch to bag, cap to hat, tails to story. That one wouldn't have popped out to me, but it makes sense. And so because of the fact that the model would have a lot of false positives, then we would just say, if you have a synonym suggestion, search it in Google and say, what's a pouch? And then have it reason and say, okay, yeah, that makes sense as a synonym, or maybe it doesn't, which actually helped us a lot. And now we can generate automatically really high quality synonyms and improve our retrieval stage in search. And then the next application area for image or for search is image score, where this is our UI. It's very minimal, as we saw earlier and right now, literally just an image and a price. And so all else being equal, you might look at the price, but then also the image. And then so the idea is if you have a better image, maybe users will click on that. Maybe in the retrieval stage, we can push better image items up in the listing. And so we used an LLM as a judge to do this. And so we used a chain of thought paradigm and basically said a bunch of stuff. Give me a number between 0 and 10, 10 being the best for this image, 0 being the worst, and go from there and have it annotate our data. And we validated that the image score returned by the LLM as labels on our training data was like related to something we actually cared about. So we used clicks as a measure of probably it's doing a good job. And so preferentially, it would say that these better image items, that same distribution, would have higher clicks. And KS tests showed it's not random, so we were pretty confident that, okay, cool, it's at least getting towards something that we think that we can rely on and not have to check every single image, because at that point, it defeats the purpose. So with that out of the way, we found out our prompt is good, our image scores are probably good, and we trained a classic, very simple MLP with frozen clip embeddings. And again, just trying to predict that image score, so like that student-teacher kind of situation, because we can't use an LLM to model every item that comes into our index. That would be, we would not be the largest marketplace anymore. We would go bankrupt and OpenAI would take all our money. So this solved that problem. And just because people like pictures, hopefully you like these. So our final model, this is the distribution of scores, and then these are images that correspond to the scores. And you can see actually that the scores on the left are the worst scores, and qualitatively, personally, yeah, those do look like worse images versus the images on the right seem to, at a glance, tell me more about the items. For instance, like trading cards, they're all like neatly laid out, and I can read them properly. So that was another way that we leveraged LLMs into production in search, which is actually a very high traffic and very sensitive area to the business. So the pros to this was super cost efficient, easy to scale. And again, we're exploring different ways of leveraging LLMs in this retrieval stage. And then one last quote from our resident ML expert that works across many projects. Yeah, that's it. He was actually, when he came on to the team, was already really familiar with weights and biases. So once we introduced it to the company, he was, again, able to work across many teams. It's really been an awesome experience. So retrieval out of the way, now we get to the post-retrieval stage. And so re-ranking, in this case of our research results, the idea is re-ranking is a kind of a general idea for you have an ordered list of things, some are more relevant than others, place the more relevant things, whatever you think is relevant, higher in the list so that you can find it faster. And so for search in our marketplace, it looks like this, where at the retrieval stage now, we've hammered out this thing where you can find a diverse candidate set that actually maps to what users are looking for. So that's optimizing for relevance to the query. Now for re-ranking, we're using another AI model to map relevance to the user's search intent. And so left to right, we can see the example of our model seems to be doing the right thing. So for both purchased and liked items, it's pulling it way higher in the list to page 1 and 2, whereas the original retrieval stage from our search engine, they were much lower in the list, clearly past page 2. And then I wanted to note as well, we optimize for user engagement in general for again, community, marketplace longevity. While purchases are, they drive business metrics, we have to make sure not to over-optimize for that. And so a quick bit of math, this is the most math you'll see in this presentation, really just to set up the next slide, but in ranking, we have a measure called NDCG, which basically says for this ordered list of things, how good is it? Is 1 being the best possible ordering you could give me, 0 being the worst. And a quick thing to point out, the reason why we focused on retrieval is because of the fact that if you have terrible result set, you can re-rank it all you want, it'll still be terrible. And so we need to make sure that we have the right amount of candidates before we can even do anything after that. So this sets up the next slide, which is, I guess, the more important thing for anybody coming here about search metrics. Custom metrics helped us a lot. So namely purchase NDCG, where it's a very simple idea. We actually got this from a colleague of ours, a colleague at Vinted. His name is Alexis Katayev. And basically it's just, your business cares about purchases, so just pay attention to purchases. And it seems so simple that we didn't think about it up to that point, but that made the biggest difference, as we will see in the next slide. And so, as mentioned before, we have something like the classic NDCG that the model still to this day optimizes for. And for like a year or two, we had problems correlating our offline and online metrics. PMs were getting mad at us and they said, AI doesn't work. See, you tell me offline it does this number, but when we deploy it, sales go down. What's the problem? And so once we implemented this custom metric, now we can see at a glance, okay, the problem is that because we're optimizing for more than just purchases, the model is getting really good at things like clicks, right? Like click-heavy SERPs. And so you would see a model training like this and say, wow, it's getting way better over time. Let's release this. But then with purchase and DCG in the bottom right, you now see that, oh, well, this model is doing terrible. This actually explains why our past releases weren't successful. And then another example. So we have 2 rankers trained this time. And you'd think looking at everything but the bottom right graph that the blue model is way better, right? That's the one you would test. But if you look at purchase and DCG, it's opposite story. And so in this case, we tested and released the pink ranking model. And we released it because it did well, right? Now actually our offline metrics were correlated with our online metrics. So that's, I guess, one bit of, advice. And I think a secret to getting things into production is focusing on the metrics that really matter to your particular use case. And then the last thing is, as with all of the other projects we've talked about already, we've used qualitative spot checking. So we also took advantage of weights and biases here to output the first couple of rankings for each epic for like some sampled set of items to kind of make sure that it's doing the right thing. And so this helped us a lot to find kind of issues with certain categories or differences between performance and head and tail queries. And I think that actually was it Sean's keynote talking about experiment, track everything, inspect individual examples, and then measure progress. So all of those things were key in all of our projects, LLM and non-LLM. And then going back into the ROI of these projects. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, maybe I did. I've had spirited discussions with our PR team on exactly what numbers we could talk about. And their answer was nothing, literally nothing outside of our IR page for investor relations. So this I pulled directly from our investor relations page. And I'm not going to say this was fully causal, but you see that little blue bar over there? That's literally the quarter that we released all of these features. And again, I know the attribution, the impact attribution of each of these features. Even something like search ranking, can't talk a number. It's like orders of magnitude more than my salary, though. So I'd like to think that probably helped that blue bar just a little bit. And so key takeaways, again, kind of focusing on getting things to production. Big growth through small steps. I think that was a theme that I've seen through the keynotes, through the talks, through even the workshop yesterday. Just start from where you are. It seems stupid, right? I'm just going to launch ChatGPT internally, but you learn a lot of lessons. And then using something like weights and biases, and whatever you have to check your examples and your metrics, then you can iterate and then learn lessons and then build things that one day are facing users and have business impact. And then look for user impact first. This is just near and dear to my heart. I see a lot of engineers like getting excited, hammer looking for a nail. But when you look at user impact first, you'll see which LLM hammer to use. So you'll still get to use the cool tools, don't worry. And then target the right measures for your problem. Again, custom metrics, things like that. Like whatever is relevant to your business. Don't just take a metric that someone pulled off the shelf that comes out of like scikit-learn or something and then run with it. Make sure that it really matters for your use case. And then what's next? So I kind of teased, we're defining the future of C2C e-commerce. So I say that as I was making this presentation, I said, am I overselling this? Factually, I'm not, only because we are Japan's largest marketplace. No one else is doing this. So by definition, we're doing it. And maybe I'm too like in the weeds where it doesn't seem exciting to me, but I think we're actually going to do that in the future. So it convinced me as well, where now LLMs, again, we're expanding use cases across the entire business to all those core teams. We're actually use cases for user-facing, so again, buyer and lister assistance in different ways. And so we want to not just define what the users are doing. We want to redefine it because that's what we did when we were founded in 2013. We were Japan's first unicorn. No one's going to do it but us, so let's do it. And I think our VP of AI was like, you should talk about how we're going to build our own LLM. I'm like, that sounds crazy. Why would we do that, right? It's going to be expensive. That's not our area of expertise. But as I thought about it, I'm like, you know what? We're already doing that, right? We're already with these small steps building an e-commerce LLM with our data. So he's right. We're going to build an LLM at Mercari and then hopefully be of use not just to our users, but also to the broader community. So that would be the next step. And then my favorite part of the presentation, acknowledgements. So I wanted to say thank you to everyone here. So I was actually talking about many projects that weren't my own. LLM team on top worked on the ones that you saw in the beginning of the presentation. Search team in the two bottom rows worked on the other projects in addition to all the collaboration work between teams. So thank you to them for all of their hard work. And then finally, our weights and biases team, only because they worked with us for like the past year to get a contract for a company that has enough money. It was really mind-boggling to me, right? For something really small, but like they stuck with us. They gave us like the right customer support, and especially Yuya-san, who's actually here in the audience today. So yeah, thank you for your work. That was one bit of feedback I heard from all of our engineers across teams using this, was that he was there like 24/7 to answer questions, give talks. Like, okay, I can give you like a workshop on that tomorrow. So I think that was really useful for us to kind of iterate quickly and then again, get these things developed well and within the quarter so that we can ship it to production. So that's it. Thank you everyone for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm here for the next few minutes.